Michaela, and the book I chose to read for the independent novel unit is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, which was published on January 28th, 1813. It is a realistic historical romance novel which contains a lot of drama and a lot of tension between the characters, which is why I like it very much. As for availability, the school provides physical copies of the book as well as the PDF form, which can be looked for on Google. And there are many audiobooks and voiceovers on YouTube and Spotify, as well as the movie adaptation of the book, which I really like, which is available on streaming services such as Amazon Prime Video and YouTube. Pride and Prejudice takes place in rural England at the turning point of the 19th century, and it doesn't take much in the city of London because most of the characters are very wealthy, and so at this time wealthy people either lived in like country houses or the rural parts of England where they could have big mansions and people that worked for them. And there was mention of soldiers and regiments that were made in the novels, so it's easy to assume that it could have taken place during the time of the Napoleonic Wars. Pride and Prejudice starts with the arrival of Mr. Bingley, who is a wealthy man that is set for a large inheritance, and it follows the Bennet family, which is made up of the mother, Mrs. Bennet, the father, Mr. Bennet, and then the 5 daughters, who are Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia. And with those 5 daughters, Miss Bennet persists in finding suitable marriages for all of them throughout the book, and she becomes very shallow because of this. And in the beginning, Bingley becomes closer to Jane, and eventually she falls ill during a visit to his estate, which forces them to grow fonder for one another. And on the other side, Elizabeth and Darcy partake in a slow burn romance, fighting their feelings for one another while still trying to find meaning behind their love and affection. And the family and friends of the wealthier side, which is Bingley and Darcy, grow a dislike for the Bennet family because the men actually like the women for who they are and their personality instead of their wealth and status. So we can see that there is a divide between the social side of the marriages and the love side of the marriage. And the whole book is just a journey of all the proposals that are involved and the arranged marriages that are made in the story and how the characters overcome the social dislikes and just find their way into making happy relationships. So I would say that the main 4 themes of Pride and Prejudice are actually in the title. So the first 2 being pride and prejudice, and then the other 2 being class and love, which I think is very fitting for the time and the era that the book was in. As for pride, a lot of the men in the book have the theme of pride. They don't want to expose their feelings, and they kind of just want to make themselves seem more dominant because of their wealth and their money and their influence. And because of that comes into the theme of prejudice. They don't want to marry out of love because they're afraid of the social status that will be affected if they do marry out of love. For example, Darcy is kind of hesitant to pursue his feelings for Elizabeth because he's scared of what his family and his friends will think of the marriage. And as for class and love, they both tie into the themes of Pride and Prejudice. Class, we can see that Miss Bennet especially is very worried about her class and her social status, and she wants her daughters to excel because she wasn't able to excel at that level when she was younger. And as for love, love is all throughout the book, and we see it in many different forms, and there are a lot of sacrifices made out of love. So what I like most about Pride and Prejudice is that there are a lot of archetypes within the novel, but the characters have their own personalities, which are individual to themselves, and just the time period in general, and that makes it very personal to the era. And also, I would say every character experiences some form of development, which is very satisfying to see because in some novels, most characters don't. And that, as an example, Jane understands that she can't please everyone solely with her character and her innocence. As we see with Bingley's sisters, they don't really like her throughout the story. And I would say the most significant character development was Darcy, who gets past his pride to make amends with Elizabeth and eventually gets with her. And as for Elizabeth, she just learns that she needs to like let go of her strongness and just fall into love. And I also love that Elizabeth teaches Darcy about humility, and that is something that is probably not as realistic to the time era, but she turned him and helped him realize that he didn't need to be so prideful all the time and that it was okay to fall in love. And there's also many strong and independent women, as the Bennet family is made up of 5 sisters. So I really like their sisterhood, and yeah. People that I think would enjoy this book are people that enjoy romance novels or the romance genre in general, and also like old Georgian era books with old English. I feel like this is a book that definitely has a lot of old English, but I feel like if you're interested in the history and just society at that time, that this book is very fitting. So one thing that I disliked about Pride and Prejudice was the slow burn romance between Elizabeth and Darcy. Seeing the movie, it was also a very slow burn romance, and it was very tense between the two characters. So it was kind of interesting to see how the movie compared to the book itself. But I thought it was very suspenseful to see how they would end up. Obviously, I knew that they would end up together, but it was just very interesting to see how they would act around each other and how Jane Austen developed those characters individually and together. And another thing that was kind of a dislike for me was the long and slow character development, because there would be times where the characters would develop but then they would go back to their old ways, and it was kind of just a back and forth. But at the end of the novel, we see how those components all come into play. And I feel like people that would dislike this novel are just people that don't like Old English and just not really the era specifically. So the quote that I find the most significant is actually the opening line of the novel, which is, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." And to me, this quote is significant because it's not only the opening line of the book, but it has a masculine perspective on the idea of marriage at the time, and it closes off any interpretation to the idea that marriage could be for love, which turns out to be not what the story is about. It's actually like interesting to see why Jane Austen picked this line to be the beginning of the novel, because we see that it's more of a women perspective at the end. And as the novel progresses, we see that although for many couples there's an intention to marry for money and social status, but it is rare for people to marry out of love, putting their pride away and ignoring possible prejudice. So that was the end of my talk on Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen.